Welcome to the Innovation Storytellers Podcast. We talk to innovators and disruptors in R&D, product managers, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs, innovation thought leaders, and their storytellers who help bring their amazing ideas to life. Now, here's your host, innovation storyteller, CEO, speaker, and coach to the world's top innovation teams, Susan Lindner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Lindner, CEO of Emerging Media. And for the last 20 years, I've been helping innovators and disruptors to tell their stories. 10 acquisitions, hundreds of innovation products, and countless hockey stick growth curves later, I want to share with you how the greatest innovations get to market using stories to pave the way. I have with me today a fantastic innovator in the startup space, a category you've probably never even heard of. This is Roei Ganzarski, and he is the CEO of MagniX, one of the most innovative aviation startups in the world. And I can't wait to hear his innovation story. Thank you so much for joining me today, Roei.
Thank you. This is going to be a lot of fun.
So tell us a little bit about you and how you got to this place. I know you have background in really big aviation companies, and now you're going really small. Tell us how you got there.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Israel. I served in the military there for 5 years, then worked in some advertising and PR, and eventually wanted to do some M&A work. And so my father recommended that I come to the United States to study finance and get my MBA, which is where most of the big deals get done. And so while going here, I came to the University of Washington with my wife, with an ultimatum that we'll be here for 2 years. And once we finish graduation, we'll go back to Israel. Now, 24 years later, clearly that didn't happen. I like to joke that I still have a credit outstanding that I have to finish, and thus we haven't formally graduated yet. But basically, I got to work during school at Bank of America when Bank of America, Nations Bank, and Seafirst Bank were emerging. And I got to see what that looks like from a large American corporation. Then had a short stint with a small investment private bank here in the Seattle area. And then eventually joined the Boeing family of companies, where I spent 13 years doing everything from business development, sales, marketing, strategy, et cetera, culminating in my final role there, which was the chief customer officer for Boeing's flight services division. And there I was responsible for all basically customer and market facing organizations. But at some point, I got this itch, if you will. My wife likes to joke and say that it maybe had something to do with me turning 40, maybe not, I don't know. But there are worse alternatives to looking at maybe changing jobs. And it's not that anything had changed at Boeing. I had changed. And I no longer fit this is how we do things at the Boeing company. This is how we've done them for 100 years. As Star Trek would say, you will be assimilated, resistance is futile. I realized that for me, maybe this wasn't the place anymore. And I started to look around at, what other options are out there. And while I'm thinking about this, I was approached regarding a small startup called BoldIQ. Basically, it was 6 mathematicians and physicists who had claimed to have solved real-time optimization of really complex schedules. So I went to see it, fell in love with it, and decided to join the company and turn it into a business. A little under 7 years later, it was a multi-million-dollar profitable software as a service company with customers across the world in different industries, aviation, of course, being one of them, but then also food deliveries, ground transport, et cetera. And as that was kind of coming to its, I'll call it steady state growth pattern, I got another call from the owners of MagniX with a very similar story saying, hey, we just developed this motor, electric motor. We think it could be good for airplanes. It could really revolutionize aviation. And that is something that was just starting out with cars, not really entrenched in aviation. But I was intrigued, went to see it, and the second I walked into their building in Australia, which is where they started, I fell in love with it and knew that this would be my next role. And this would really be where I personally created my own legacy for my kids, my grandkids, in that in everything I'd been doing until then, it was really about doing a really cool function or a really cool aspect of a large story. In the case of MagniX, It was really about creating a story from scratch that when people 20, 30, 40 years from now look back, if we're successful, it will be clear to say that's when electric aviation started. That's when the revolution began. And that really caught my attention, caught my heart. And so I joined MagniX, and as they say, the rest is history.
Wow. I mean, to think about, I remember, Sheryl Sandberg was asked, what made you decide to join Facebook? And she said, when someone gives you a free ticket on a rocket ship, you don't even ask where it's going. You just say, yes, let's go. And so I'm wondering if you've had that same kind of butterflies feeling in the stomach when you were like, oh my gosh, electric powered airplanes. Whoa.
To me, it was when I saw the first prototype motor turning, I kind of thought to myself, Wright brothers flew the first powered plane. Then in 1939, the first jet engine started working and jet age of aviation started. And that's the same age we live in today. And that was 70, 80 years ago. And I thought to myself, this actually could create the new age of aviation. Imagine flying in an aircraft that created no pollution, that cost half the amount to fly. What would that do to our day-to-day lives of traveling? We could redefine what we call a suburb, right? If you're willing to drive an hour to work every day or an hour and a half, why not fly 15 minutes and do so without emissions? And I thought to myself about my grandkids that I don't have yet, but how will they fly? And wouldn't it be really cool to be part of ensuring that that happens? And so, yeah, it's one of those things that you just couldn't say no to.
Amazing. And yet it's not without its risk, right? What's the first question people ask you when they're like, electric powered planes, but what if?
Actually, there aren't really questions. It's, there's not enough batteries to do that. There's not enough power to do that. Will the batteries catch fire? Is it safe? What if you run out of batteries when you're flying? So we get a bunch of questions and a bunch of naysayers. And almost everything they say has something in reality. I mean, there are, as I tell my team and as I tell new recruits, there are a million legitimate reasons we will fail. Not necessarily our own company, it could be the industry, it could be just the notion of electric aviation. A million legitimate reasons we'll fail. But for the few that will succeed, my God, it will change the face of transportation as we know it. And that's what keeps us going, right? Imagine Tesla 10 years ago. They were told the same thing. You'll never have enough batteries, you'll never have enough range, it's not safe enough. And here we are today. No one turns their head when a Tesla drives by or any electric area. I have a Kia electric car. No one even pays attention anymore. It's just normal.
Well,
so
you can't even hear them coming.
Yeah, exactly.
No one turns their head because they're silent but deadly.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. What a phenomenal risk to take, right? Also, at this stage in your life to say, wow, I know exactly what steady looks like. I know what the corporate world looks like. I know what experience in a startup looks like. It seems like it's the perfect confluence, Roei, of all of your experiences coming together in electric aviation.
For me, the point I knew that it was time for me to change, leaving kind of the big corporate world, was when on the drive to work, I could anticipate exactly what would happen at that day. It happened, and you drive back home and your wife doesn't even ask you how was work today. I knew that at that point, it was time to change. Again, nothing wrong with the Boeing company. To this day, I love that company. I think they make phenomenal products. I think that they do great things. I had changed and it just didn't fit me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about the context in which MagniX arose. What was the catalyst for this innovation at the time when the founders really started working on this?
So the main founder of what was then Guina Technologies, Tony Guina, was a scientist, and he wanted to, and I'll say this kind of in a very general way, follow in the footsteps of Tesla, the original Tesla, not the car company Tesla.
Oh, Nikolai.
Nikolai Tesla.
Yeah.
Actually bring to bear advanced technologies when it came to the use of electricity for power. power for motion, for motors. And he started a company, Guina Technologies, to look at the various technologies that could be integrated and executed in electric motors, not necessarily for aviation, just in general. The company was looking at superconducting motors, axial flux, radial flux, permanent magnet type motors, etc., just doing all sorts of research. And in 2017, they started in 2009. So they were doing this for years. I think the years of research going into different technologies. And in 2017, they developed a motor as part of these various projects that eventually became our prototype. Really powerful, really lightweight, lots of redundancy and reliability built into it. And they looked at it and said, maybe actually someone could use this beyond just the interesting R&D facets of it. And they went and talked to various industries, industrial plants, cars, boats, and eventually talked to some airplane companies. And it became really evident that everything that was culminated in that prototype motor was perfect for aviation. The redundancy and reliability aspects of it, multiple aspects of safety that are in there, longevity, clearly power to weight ratio. So all those aspects were really important for aviation. And there was no real electric aviation industry out there. There was only one company that had been able to do an electric motor of that scale, a small company in Europe called Siemens, which, not really small.
And so they thought shop in
Germany. Exactly. And they thought to themselves, wow, there must be something here because one, a real big company did this. And so there must be something real there. Two, the only other company to be able to do it is little MagniX, then called MagniX out of Australia. Let's do that. And so the company pivoted to become a company focused on commercial aviation and the electrification of it.
Mm-hmm. And commercial aviation initially meant you started with really small planes, correct? With Cessnas and smaller vehicles that could really support the battery life and that power to weight ratio that you described.
Well, actually, we took on a challenge in that, depending on the perspective you look at, those are big planes. At that stage, and even today, the majority of electric aircraft work that you see going on are for 1, 2, maybe 4-person aircraft. We started with the smallest aircraft being a 5-passenger plus a pilot aircraft, the eBeaver, the electric Beaver, flown by Harbor Air, who are our launch partner. Then we moved on to the 9-passenger Cessna Caravan. And so when we talked about commercial aviation, we really focused on those aircraft that were purposely built to transport people and or cargo for a business. And so we didn't want to deal with the 2-passenger, 3-passenger, 4-passenger ones. We really went straight to those businesses where the majority of emissions are created and where cost of operation is really crucial. If you're flying your own aircraft, you're probably a little more wealthy or a little more financially capable than the average person. Maybe. And so it would be great to go electric and reduce your costs, but the impact would be you. When you're able to reduce the costs and emissions of an airline, the impact is multifold, right? Because it impacts everyone else who can buy a ticket on your operation. So that was why we really focus on commercial aviation.
Got it. And that desire also lends itself to a level of reliability, right? You sign a deal with a company and you'll have ongoing business as opposed to trying to constantly sell consumers on this opportunity.
Well, that's one. It also, though, means a lot more difficult because if I focus on selling to individual aircraft, I can do so under regulatory requirements that are a lot less stringent than those of an aircraft that are flying people, right? Even the FAA or any regulatory body in the world knows if you're flying yourself in an aircraft, there's a level of risk you're willing to accept. And so the category and requirements of that aircraft are less stringent. If you're now taking someone for fee, that individual, those people paying a ticket price to get on your plane are assuming a level of safety because they don't understand what goes into the airplane. They just know if I'm buying a ticket from X operator, I assume this thing is safe and has passed tests, et cetera. And so the regulatory requirements are much more stringent as well. So we chose a sector that, yes, has better business capabilities in the future, but also is tougher to get into.
So, which also creates a barrier to entry for your competition, right?
Yes, it creates a phenomenal moat around our business that if and when we are able to get into that sector and really start to lead in it, it will be hard for others to compete and get into.
Yeah. And why do you think we're, now, as you mentioned, like people don't even turn their head when they see an electric car. I think the next phase for the automotive industry is autonomous driving, right?
Yeah.
That's the next, oh my God, would I get in that car? The same way we had that feeling of would I get in that Uber when it first came out?
Right.
A stranger. Do you feel like there's that impediment, that fear for, well, it sounds like from answering those initial questions, there already is an innate fear, right, of the innovation, of the new. How are you telling that story to placate the fear?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say as human beings, the majority of people fear any change.
Right.
It really doesn't matter if it's technological, operational, process-wise. People just fear change. It's like, oh my God, this isn't how I'm used to doing it. What if? Very few actually say, oh my God, this isn't how we're doing it. Why not? Right? And so that's the minority, which is why kind of people want to hear about it. And so, yes, there are many fears. Everything from, will the batteries catch fire? No one asks, will fuel catch fire? Even though, interestingly enough, there's a reason you can't light a match at a gas station. Fuel is combustible, right? But we've gotten used to safety of fuel in an aircraft or in a car. But we haven't gotten used to yet safety of batteries. That's why no one shows on YouTube a regular car, bursting into flames. But everyone shows a battery car doing so because it's novel. And so those questions continue. Is it going to be like what was it? I think it was the Samsung Note 7, where a few of the phones caught fire. I get those questions now. Is this the same batteries in the Samsung Note 7? No, not really. That was a phone. This is an airplane. But people ask. And so there's a few ways I answer that. One, the nice thing about aviation is also the toughest. It's a very stringent regulatory environment. The FAA and any other regulatory body will not allow us to take people on that plane before we have proven that it's as safe, if not more so, as reliable, if not more so, than anything else out there today. And so every passenger will know you have passed all those gates to prove the point. So you don't have to worry about it. It's not like I can say, oh, I'm going to try this. It's like, no, there is no beta version of an aircraft. So that's one. People ask, what happens if you run out of battery in the air? It's like, what happens if you run out of fuel in the air? The aircraft is designed to have spare in it. So just like we're required by law to have spare fuel in the aircraft in case of emergencies, etc., we are going to be required to have spare battery in the aircraft. No different. Pilots are expected to plan their flights according to the fuel that they have and use the fuel in a way that's efficient. It'll be exactly the same as batteries. And so at the end of the day, what I try to explain and to tell the story of is when you get on a plane as a passenger, you really don't know what's going on in front. You don't know what the pilot's doing or not doing. You don't know how the fuel system works. You've just come to rely on the fact that the system is safe and reliable for you because the government or the regulatory authority or the airline said so. It will be no different, except it'll be a lot more efficient. It'll be a lot cleaner, a lot quieter, a lot cheaper when it goes electric.
Yeah. And that is the case with these planes, right? Anywhere from 5 to 9 people. The motors are so loud. I mean, when you think about, I know just taking these little puddle jumpers or, in Vancouver, going to Vancouver Island, and my husband, and I wanted to look out the window and point out things to one another, but we could barely hear each other. And we're like,
that's right.
Talk about it on the ground,
That's right. That's right. So just like with an electric car, you're still going to hear the wind outside. You're still going to hear the tires as you drive. So with the airplane, it's going to be the same. You'll still hear, for example, the propeller turning and pushing wind, but the engine itself is going to be completely silent. And so the overall experience is going to be around, we're looking at 40 to 60% quieter when you're on the ground or in the cabin, which is going to be tremendous when you think about the flying. So it's not just air pollution, it's also noise pollution, the smells of the fuel that you get when you're walking in and around those types of aircraft. And so this will completely revolutionize the experience of flying.
So in the process of innovating now, did you hit certain regulatory hurdles that made you question whether or not you were actually going to be able to get this done? Or had companies like Tesla and GM and Ford who have been doing electric vehicles actually pave the way? to make the regulatory barriers a little less challenging?
No, not at all. I mean,
Oh.
the car technology, while is an electric motor, is nothing to do with aviation or what's required to surpass rules. In fact, any electric car motor that you would take and try to pass regulation, you wouldn't pass the first hurdle. Everything from the hardware, the software, to give you an example, we have to certify the metal that we use to build the part that then goes into the assembly of the motor. When we
Wow.
certify the software, it's not just that the FAA check our software, our source code. They check the systems on which we wrote the software. Imagine if I had to approve a Word document and I didn't have to just approve the letter you wrote. I had to approve Microsoft Word's system and Windows to ensure that that system didn't allow you to make mistakes in your letter. So it's that level of scrutiny and transparency that's required to get aviation approval. And so every day is a question of, oh my God, this is so much work. This is so hard.
Yeah.
But I am blessed with a phenomenal team at MagniX, and every hurdle, every gate, every wall we show up to, and there are a lot of them, we take as this is why we're here, right? If this was easy, everybody would be doing it. And so when you're a leader in this industry, when you're doing something, when you look left and right and there's no one next to you, and you're kind of, wow, how are we going to do this? And the answer is nobody knows. It makes it all so exciting. And so that's really what drives all of us, pun intended, to work every day.
And so tell me a little bit about your colleagues. Are they from the aviation industry? Are they from the electric car industry? Where does this team assembled from? Where does their expertise come from?
It's split. One of the things I truly believe in is diversity, but I take diversity to kind of the level I think diversity truly means, which is you think differently, not necessarily that you have to look differently or have a different gender. I mean, those are the face value diversity aspects that are much easier to deal with. It's really about the diversity of thought that's important. So if you look at our company, we are probably split half from aerospace backgrounds, half nothing to do with aerospace. And even within that, within the aerospace backgrounds, there are a group that came from the large kind of traditional companies, but got, like I did, to a point where they wanted to do something different. And half are from other startups in aerospace. Some are from propulsion and from aircraft. Some have nothing to do with propulsion and aircraft. And all are from complete different countries of origin. I'm not talking about, second, third generation immigrants, literally moved here to join MagniX or to join another company and then joined MagniX. And the same exact thing from the non-aerospace group. We have folks that are from cars, boats, retail, banking, finance, space, all over. And even there, again, different countries, of course, male, female, et cetera, et cetera. But it's amazing to think that we are today 50 people and we represent a little over 20 different countries as first generation immigration. So from that perspective, when you think about diversity of thought and cultural upbringing and how do you speak, how do you present your ideas, it's a fascinating place to work every single day.
Wow. So you get this global picture from day one if you decide to come to work for MagniX.
Absolutely. You also get the global challenge because everybody thinks differently than you do. And in fact, everybody is encouraged to voice their differences. I don't think like you do. I think we should do it differently. Here's why I think my point is valid, your point isn't valid. And it's not just about the technicalities of what we're doing, the advanced technology. It's even about how we behave, how we speak, how our offices will look. We really want this mesh of different opinions because that's how the best decisions are made. It doesn't mean everyone gets to say, this is how we're going to do it. And not everyone decides that, but everyone gets to voice their opinion as encouraged to voice their opinion, because if everyone is silent, then what's the whole idea of diversity of thought? So the idea is let's argue, let's debate, let's bring our voices so that everyone can hear them. And it doesn't matter who's in the room, lowest level employee or the CEO. If you don't agree, you don't agree, and you bring it up. And it really makes for, to me, the funnest days of work is when we get into these debates that people are passionate about. But it's not just about, I don't agree, why? Because I don't. No, when you don't agree, you bring forward your argument. I don't think this is right. Here's why. Here's what I think the alternative should be. And now we can actually have a really good conversation.
So, when you think about yourself in the context of this work, right, and the stories that you tell to attract great talent, like what you're talking about, you and I discussed ahead of time what it's like to come and work in your offices and what it's like to actually climb the stairs in your offices. And can you tell our audience a little bit about how your employees are kind of writing the next chapter of aviation history?
Yeah. So when we put together MagniX as a pivot into aerospace, one of the things we wanted to do was to ensure that we don't become the very companies we left. We didn't want to create the next Boeing, Airbus, GE, Pratt and Whitney, all of these phenomenal aerospace legacy companies for where some of our employees came from. We didn't want to create the same thing because otherwise we would have just stayed there. We wanted more of a nimble, creative, innovative, challenge-filled company where people could really leave their mark and make a difference. We wanted to be more like an Amazon, a Starbucks, a Costco, a Microsoft, all, by the way, phenomenal Seattle-based companies as well, who continually question their own status quo. But we're not making coffee. We're not selling things online. There is a serious safety aspect and regulatory aspect to what we're doing. And so we couldn't just be a startup, but we couldn't we didn't want to be another aerospace company. We wanted to create this new blend. And that comes from everything from as you said, the environment of our offices. We try to use vibrant, kind of clean colors, clean lines, a lot of imagery. We didn't want the traditional gray, practical aerospace engineering look. We wanted it to be more like a startup, a tech startup that people are used to, but without the foosball, basketball, ping pong table, because we also wanted that serious aspect to it. So it's a blend. No one comes to work in jeans and flip-flops. Everyone wears professional dress here, slacks, polo shirt, etc. But we like to have a lot of fun as well with what we're doing. Our stairs up, for example, our history wall. Where did we start back in 2009? And what were the various milestones that brought us to where we are today? And there's a lot of wall to fill because our future is evolving as we move forward. So every milestone earns its spot on the wall. One fun one we have is when we blew up our first power module when we were creating our own inverters. Most companies would look at that and say, oh, how do we avoid that? That wasn't good. One, it was expensive. Two, it caused delays, etc. You blow up your power module. We looked at it and said, we blew up a power module because no one had ever done that before. Yeah, it's one of it's kind of like Mythbusters, right? We didn't want to blow it up. So don't get me wrong, the whole notion of, startups love to fail. No, nobody loves to fail. We don't love to fail. What we love is to learn. And so if failing is one of those ways to learn, then by all means, let's learn from it. But no one likes to fail or no one likes to make mistakes. So it's really about, if you're going to make that mistake and blow up a power module, what are we learning from it? So we took that blown up power module after we learned everything we could from it, and then we framed it, and it's part of our legacy, our history. This is what it took to be here. Now, the key thing is we don't ever want a second blown up power module because we have to have learned from that. And so we want new things on the wall, but we always want to be moving forward. So yeah, that part of the fun in our company is, I won't say celebrating our failures, but celebrating our ability to learn from them.
Yeah. When you and I first spoke, one of the things that really struck me, I asked you, what role does storytelling play in your company? And you said, my company is based on storytelling. And for the innovators that are listening, our audience are innovators and the storytellers that support those innovators. And my dream is to turn those innovators into storytellers themselves, because I really believe that's how innovation eventually meets its target market, is our ability to influence other people along the way and bring other people along in the journey, whether it's the engineering team, the R&D team, our sales and marketing and PR people. You come from that background too, you know it. So where does the storytelling process start at MagniX? Like when does when does a prospective employee first encounter storytelling at MagniX?
In the interview.
Mm.
And so we want to hear what people have to say. And so from that perspective, the interview process starts actually as a cultural screen, if you will, to make sure that the person that we're interviewing to join the company fits the company. And so we ask a lot of questions and have a lot of conversations that have nothing to do with the technical background or technical requirements for the job. Let's say it's an engineering position, or the finance background of the person if it's a finance position. Those we'll get to. Those are easy to figure out and easy to learn. It's the human being that's joining, right? Is this a person that we want to have in our office every day, all day? We work, I won't say crazy hours, but we work long hours. This isn't a bank, right? We don't do 9 to 5. We're a startup trying to change the world as we know it. And so people work long hours and we spend a lot of time with each other. We want to make sure that the people who we bring in to join fit that they're interesting, that they can tell stories from their lives, that they have hobbies beyond just, what do you do in your spare time? Oh, I do engineering. And what do you do when you're not doing engineering? I read engineering books. Okay, well, maybe that's not necessarily the person that fits our culture. Nothing wrong with that, just not a fit for our company. And so from that perspective, you hear that through storytelling. If the individual sitting in front of you can't tell the story of their life, can't tell the story of what drives their passion or lights their fire or why they even want to join a company like MagniX, if they can't tell that story, how will they tell the story of the technology that they're trying to develop? Not everyone at MagniX is an engineer. Not everyone is a scientist who can understand every complexity of the technology we're doing. And so the engineers are required to be able to tell their technological story in a way that everyone in the company can understand, including myself. As the CEO of MagniX, I am not an engineer. And so to me, a lot of what my team does is truly magic. I mean, they do phenomenal stuff, but I want to understand it at a level that I can. And so I need them to be able to tell me the story of what they're doing. What are the implications of it? What are the risks? What are the rewards? What are the opportunities? And all that comes through storytelling. It doesn't have to be, a fascinating, enticing story, but it has to be one that conveys the message really concisely. And so we start that at the interview process, and it goes throughout the time at the company.
So what happens when you find great talent that doesn't have a talent for storytelling?
Then we do two things. One, we usually don't bring them on board. But two, because we would rather be, as they say, wise and not smart. The difference is a smart person can get out of a problem that a wise person won't get into to begin with. And so if the key element of our company is the cultural fit, if you don't have the cultural fit, we won't bring you in. We are sure that as an individual, you will find a better place that fits your culture than vice versa. We don't want to impose our cultural individuals where it doesn't fit. Technical stuff, again, is easy. But when we do bring people in, one of the ways we enhance the storytelling is various activities that we do here. For example, every Friday, we have our all company staff meeting over coffee. I literally make Arabic coffee for everybody, the way I learned to do so back when I was younger in Israel. And I take out, my little gas burner, my little pot, and I start boiling or cooking, as they say, coffee for everybody. And we tell stories of what happens in the week. Every week, for example, one person is assigned to tell the rest of the company what they do at MagniX. You're the HR person, you're the systems engineer, you're a finance person. What do you do all day? What do you do when you come to the office? What are your challenges? What help do you need? But not in a sense from a technical perspective, rather from a tell people that don't know what you do, what you're doing. And so you get to practice your storytelling. You get to hear other people's stories and learn from that as well, right? Because it's not just you speaking, it's also you listening. And when you listen to other people's stories, you pick up nuances to, oh, I see the audience, in this case, the employees, really caught on to not just what this person was saying, but how they were saying it. And so we get to practice that on a regular basis every Friday. You get to do that in deep dive meetings that we do every Thursday afternoon, where different people in the company get to tell what they're working on. And we a lot of times will say, hey, you're getting too technical. Tell it in a way that we can understand it. And so we try to give a lot of guidelines around how do you tell the story, not just convey facts, because conveying facts, while really good, can be very boring. And when it's boring, not a lot of times people will actually absorb those facts. If you can tell the story in a way that people want to hear it, those facts get rudimentarily kind of embraced by you, by your brain, and you get to remember them better.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation with PhD in literature, Carol Barish, turned tech entrepreneur. She has been at the forefront of education technologies for the last 20 years. And her own company is a storytelling platform called Story2, where she teaches people how to tell stories. Cool. And she used this very simple formula to understand actually how the brain, the science of the story and how it works. And the first is share a memory. So when you share a memory, the listener's brain is automatically scanning their own filing cabinets for a memory that is similar to the one being shared.
To make that connection.
Yes. And so proactively, our brains are doing the same thing. You tell a memory, my brain looks for a memory, right? That's step one. Step two is then tell us the emotion. I felt when XYZ happened, I felt this. And then tell us the action that happened as a result. And the human body feels itself moving into action when you share those three. So I found that really instructive. And I talked to a lot of storytellers, but they have looked at humans' brains in an MRI with the teller and the listener.
Very cool.
And so we know that it's called mirror modeling. And so that mirror is taking place. That's what's happening in the whole room when you share a memory and an emotion, and the body is called to action.
I will remember that and infuse that to everything we do here. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And so another great piece of innovation storytelling, my desire is to build the greatest knowledge base of how we tell innovation stories, because like you said, it's so hard to get people out of the fear of change. And, over the course of the work that I've done, what we find is that there are like 4 really crucial steps. And, part of our conversation of understanding, wow, that wall of sharing the history of aviation is actually a subtle reminder that we can do this because it's been done before. So when you share a shared history around storytelling, right, around what we've done before, if Orville and Wilbur could, then we can, right? That's our collective memory coming through.
And we actually have a huge wall mural of Orville and Wilbur Wright and the Wright Flyer in one of our conference rooms. In another, we have Alexander Graham Bell, and then we have Thomas Edison. These are people who, against all knowledge around them, went and said, no, we'll be able to do this, and overcame challenges. And so those are the type, they're science-based or aerospace-based, but it's the story around them that really, when you're sitting in that room and you're in the Edison room and you see that thing on the wall, it's like no one will ever be able to say, this is too hard. Really? They were doing it at the day when there was no internet, CAD modeling, simulation. They were doing it with their bare hands and notebooks, and yet they were able to overcome. And so it's really about, you're absolutely right, it's really about looking back, remembering where we came from, but then also where we're going.
Yeah. And, this next phase, which I think is so interesting on your site too, is that the values that you talked about, like sharing these cultural values. Part of that shift in innovation is to say, okay, our values were, and now our values are. Because we actually have to take people on a bit of a values shift in order to step into the world of aviation, and this electric aviation that we haven't known before. So I always use models from the greatest viral storytellers of all time, the prophets. And you think about that shift from an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek. That is a values shift that says revenge to forgiveness, right? It's a movement that takes people into another way of thinking that says, I actually have to change how I feel about my neighbor. I have to change how I feel about the future. I have to change about my own behavior in order to take the next step into an unknown future. And the last piece is this message that says, I will never go back to doing it the old way anymore. And that's the scariest part, right? Where you say, okay, an eye for an eye, turn the other cheek, and now I will I will do war no more, right? I will try that next new thing. I can't go back to doing it the old way anymore. And I'm curious, when you think about in the event that people really took on, this new way of flying, and we know they will, right? It's just a matter of time. We know they will. What will be that moment? What is that story that says we can't go back to doing it the old way because? What do you tell people in the because part?
Because the way we do it today is so harmful to our health and our environment that the future generations will look back at us and say, how did they dare burn fuels and create all these emissions just to get from place to place when there are alternatives? That's, I think, what's going to really make that shift. We're seeing that shift start now when you see teenagers like Greta Thunberg in Sweden and others really creating a real movement. I mean, you look at Scandinavia, they're having drops in airline ticket sales because of what started there as flight shaming. The embarrassment of getting on an internal combustion engine flow aircraft and creating emissions just to go somewhere where you could have an alternative of driving an electric car or taking an electric train. And so airline ticket sales have gone down in Scandinavia, and it's spreading to Europe. The US is unfortunately still very slow to adopt change, but it will come here as well. You're already seeing some of the movement, some of the understanding. We kind of talk about it as environmental awareness. People are now aware of the environment. That's step one. Step two is, now let's take action relating to our awareness. If we weren't aware, then, doesn't matter. Why would we expect someone to take action? Now we're aware. And you don't even have to believe in global warming, climate change. It's not even at that level. When you walk up to an airplane and it's spewing out fumes from that engine and you smell them, that's not good for your health. Doesn't matter what you think about global warming or climate change. It's not good. And so if there's an alternative, and there's starting to be one with the work that we and others are doing today, future generations will look back and say, my God, how did these people live? And I think that will really be that pivot of, I now am aware, and now I'm able to take action regarding that awareness.
I love that example because that really is a value shift, right? When someone gets shamed, for getting on a plane and saying, how could you make that 24-hour flight to Thailand or that 18-hour flight to Wuhan every other week like a commuter, right? And then, so there's the value shift taking place.
To me, that is less of an example. I'll tell you why. If I live in Seattle and for whatever reason I need to get to London, I have two alternatives: get on a plane, a gas guzzling, emission creating plane, and be there in a day, or get on a sailboat and be there in 3 months. So, the alternate isn't that good. To me, it's going to start, and where the pivot will really be, in the short flights. If I want to go from Seattle to Portland, or to visit my customer in Vancouver, British Columbia, that's a 45-minute flight away, that's hard to justify. That will be a difficult conversation to have and say, I was willing to drive 45 minutes to the main hub airport, because that's where the only flights leave, get there an hour ahead of time, get on a emission creating plane for 45 minutes, and then drive again into downtown, when maybe now I'll have an alternative. Drive 20 minutes to the harbor in downtown Seattle, get there 15 minutes ahead of time, get on an electric propeller plane with only 6-7 other people, fly the same 45 minutes, but now get into downtown Vancouver. How could I ever justify doing the gas guzzling plane? I think it'll be those short, true commuter flights, those little hops that people do that are an hour, less than an hour, hour and a half, where people will start thinking, this is actually doable. Why did I ever do it differently? When that point happens, now the industry will be driven, pun intended, to really look at the larger aircraft, because until now, there's not going to be an incentive, an alternative. But when that happens and that becomes a reality, then we'll have as an industry no choice but to think about doing it differently.
That's fascinating. And so those little hops, like I think about traffic in LA. I mean, we didn't even talk about sitting in traffic and spewing all the emissions while you're just on the highway.
Yep.
But the other part of it is now looking at who are these early adopters, do you think? Because, a great story, just as you tell it, isn't sufficient, right? We need that dedicated group of apostles, those 12 friends of Jesus who kind of sat around and said, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to tell other people about this guy. The same way that we need evangelists for MagniX and for this kind of flight. So who are these early adopters going to be?
So I don't know much about the apostles, given that I'm Jewish, but the notion is the same notion. I think
listen to Moses,
Yeah, exactly.
There with the tablets and what do we think?
Who is helping him tell the story? Yeah, that's right. His brother, etc. And so in this case, I think there'll be two categories of these evangelists or the early adopters. One are going to be the tech adopters, the folks that bought the first Tesla. Why? Because it was cool and they wanted to be first. The guys or the gals who bought the first iPhone, the first tablet, those folks who say, you know what, this is new, it's revolutionary, it's part of the future, I want to lead the way because I can. Those will be one group of the first. And there are airline operators like that. I think the CEO and founder of Harbor Air, and Harbor Air as an airline is like that. They know the future is electric aviation. And they can either wait for it to happen or be part of the group that makes it happen. And so that's the first group, the ones who want to make it happen because they see it as the future. The second group are going to be those who do it because they know the environmental impact cannot be minimized and we shouldn't wait. Maybe it's not ready today. Maybe the electric planes can't do every and all flights that exist. Maybe they can't do all ranges, but they can do some. Let's start with what we have and grow from there. The first Tesla car was not a 5-passenger sedan that could go 400 miles. It was a 2-person car that could go 80 miles. And yet here we are today, right? And so that second group will be those that say this is too important to wait and minimize. We need to start with what we have now and grow it. So I think those will be the two groups that really look at this, is we know it's the future and we need to make it happen now. And two, the negative impact of not doing it is so great, we need to start it now. And between those two, that's where the revolution will begin.
There are already competitors in the space, right? You have like Uber Elevate, Airbus, Lilium.
Yeah, a bunch.
Yeah. So, and this isn't just about flights that are taking off from one urban center or even a rural area to one rural outpost, right? Where, you're kind of away from the urban trappings, but there's a whole group now of urban air mobility, as they're calling the category. How do you envision that? Are we taking flights now suddenly from Connecticut to Manhattan the way that people would take a helicopter? Is that what we're going to see?
Yeah, eventually, yes. And so I think there's going to be two parts to this. On the aviation side, there are three main categories. There's going to be the ultra long haul, so those flights of 1,000 miles or more, New York to London, where you have no good alternative, right? New York to Seattle, you can either drive for a week, there's no real good train solutions, or fly. So then the question is, how do you fly? So there's the ultra long haul, then there's the middle mile, flights between 50 miles to 1,000 miles, which will traditionally be from airport to airport, but not main hub airport, rather from any one of the 10,000, literally over 10,000 airports that exist in the United States. And the third category is the urban air mobility, those flights that are going to be less than 50 miles in and around major metropolitan areas. That's the aviation side. Then there's going to be the other mobility aspects, light rail that's going to be electric, cars electric, be they self-driving or driven, or your own, or probably shared. And I think the future of transportation is going to be multimodal. You may have, for example, an electric driverless car picking you up at home and taking you on a shared ride or even a private ride to a vertiport, or what's called today a vertiport or a heliport, a small landing pad that isn't a runway, but rather where a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle can pick you up. You'll take you there on the short hop. You'll get to that vertiport, get on one of those vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, who will hop you over to one of the small regional airports in your area, where you'll get on a middle mile flight to get to your destination. Or it'll hop you to one of the major hubs to get on a trans-Pacific, transatlantic flight or transcontinental flight where you can't do small electric at this stage. And so it'll be that, and when you arrive there, another vertical takeoff and landing will drop you off closer to Manhattan, where maybe an electric car, again, will take you to your final destination. So it'll be that multimodal, environmentally friendly aspect that will be, as a consumer, run from your phone or watch or whatever piece of equipment we'll have at that stage. Now, we're talking, for that whole system to work, I'm going to guess 40 years away. But 40 years
That's not
is
long.
not that long,
Nope.
right? If you think about it, it's not that long at all. I remember, I'm 49 years old. I remember growing up with a black and white television with one rotary phone at home, where a computer wasn't even something you would think about. And now my kids grew up with a cell phone and don't understand how you could live without one. Where would you get your information? And so things are moving so fast. 30 to 40 years away isn't that far off away. But what we'll see in the short term are very much movements towards that direction. We're already seeing electric cars driven. We're seeing work on autonomous. We're already seeing shared services like Uber and Lyft. We're already seeing now movement towards electric aviation. And so all these things are starting slowly but surely to come together. Now it's up to us to continue and encourage and do that. It's up to our governments to continue to, or to start, I would say, encouraging it. And between those two things, maybe we can even accelerate it.
So is there an effort within your category of aviation, this urban mobility, where there is a powerful consensus around that story? Are you and the other players in the space telling the same story so that we all get it, us on the outside?
Absolutely. The story you will hear at the highest level is the same. Multimodal, environmentally friendly, fully automated, door-to-door transportation. You'll hear that at the highest level the same. Where the nuances and differences are, what's going to be first? Is it going to be the regional flying, or is it going to be the vertical takeoff and landing? Is it going to be autonomous cars or autonomous planes, which are easier to do? So a lot of those nuances inside the story may be different, but the overall story is the same, which is really encouraging, because it means we're all working towards that same 40-year goal. How we get there at the end really doesn't matter.
And yet all of us need to come along with you. So as long as the story allows us to see ourselves in it, participate in it, experience the emotion in it, that is not fear. Right? Like how
I think the new fear that's happening today is the fear of travel. You think about having to drive. I know people that the drive to the airport is so stressful, they'd rather not fly. I have to drive through traffic, find parking at the airport parking lot. Then I have to stand with thousands of other people in TSA lines to go through security. Then I have to sit for an hour at the airport waiting around, get on a 45-minute, hour and a half flight, get to the other side. Now I have to look for public transport, only to, again, drive another hour to wherever I'm going to in my destination. That whole door-to-door experience is so not fun that you just don't want to do it. And people end up driving 3, 4, 7 hours from their home with their own car, because they know that they're in control and they know what their car is doing. And then they'll have their car at the other end of it, and they don't have to deal with all the other hassles. Imagine if you could make the door-to-door travel, that experience, so effortless that you don't have to think about it. That's really the future we're all working towards.
Yeah. Because you're right. I mean, I've stopped taking flights to Boston and DC because I would just prefer to get on the train. Like, I don't want to deal with the hassles of flying when I'm just doing short hops.
Yep.
So, and then once you sit down on the train, you're like, there's got to be a better way than this. Like you're still not even satisfied with that experience.
Yep.
Yeah. So this has been such a fantastic conversation. And I think it's not just the technology and the future of aviation that you're sharing with us that's so helpful, but rather the really conscientious thinking that you bring to the company about how story is central to bringing innovation to the masses. And if we don't, not to mention holding a company culture together, but if we can't tell the story right to one another, then we can't get it right to the rest of the world. And it's so important that you have like a Friday afternoon, kind of a Friday morning campfire session with your team that really hones and improves people's storytelling skill too. So I just want to applaud you for making storytelling such a central part of your innovation work, because at least from what I've seen, you can't have one without the other.
And we get to have a great pot of coffee as well.
Yes, who doesn't want Turkish coffee? The stronger, the better. Absolutely.
Yep, that's right.
Well, this has just been such a fantastic conversation, Roei. Thank you so much for sharing it. I'm curious if there's anything else that you want to leave with our innovators about either the storytelling process or even your thoughts around, how the rest of us should be thinking around electric aviation.
I mean, the only thing I would say about storytelling is don't be afraid to try it. No different than the fear we were talking about before. People who don't think they're good storytellers or have never tried being storytellers are afraid of standing up in front of the audience and telling a story. And if they don't do that, how will they ever know? How will they ever get better? And so I would just encourage anyone who's listening that don't think that they are one, try to be one and see what happens, and go practice, right? Practice in front of strangers, because then who cares? Nobody knows you. As I tell my kids when I embarrass them, in a room full of strangers, nobody knows you. So how could you ever be embarrassed? And so that's how I kind of excuse myself of having some fun with my kids. It's no different having fun with yourself. Enjoy it. The idea to me of storytelling and really having fun in telling a good story is that aspect. It's having fun. Because if you're enjoying it, the story itself will come out so much better.
Yes. And, maybe we'll all try Carol's approach, with the memory, the emotion, and then the action. Yeah. And see what happens. So if you are out there and you are afraid to tell your story, just think about one great memory as it relates. Tell us how you felt and tell us what happened after, so that we're sitting on the edge of our seats waiting to know what happened next.
Very cool.
Right. Roei Ganzarski, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Congratulations on your Fast Company Most Innovative Companies in the World list.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic news for you guys too. And we look forward to getting lots of feedback on this particular podcast. I know we're going to get a lot of good input. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
This innovation story has ended, but yours is just beginning. Go to innovationstorytellers.com, download the free Innovation Storytelling Blueprint, and sign up to pre-order Susan's book, Innovation Storytelling. Get the resources, runway, and recognition you deserve. Due out this spring. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until the next innovation story.